January 1945. Somewhere along a frozen, battered stretch of the Western Front, an American M4 Sherman burns like a beacon in the snow. Flames crawl along its hull, licking the edges of torn armor plates, spitting sparks into the frigid wind. The sky hangs low and colorless overhead, heavy with smoke drifting from distant artillery. Every sound feels sharpened by the cold, the crackle of fire, the groan of metal expanding in heat, the faint echo of rifles far down the valley. Behind the ruined tank's silhouette stands a single lieutenant, half covered in soot, one sleeve scorched, breath steaming in violent bursts. His gloves are gone. His rifle is jammed somewhere in the mud. Only the tank's mounted. 50 caliber machine gun remains, still intact, still loaded, still positioned above the burning wreck he refuses to abandon. Across the tree line, 50 German infantry push forward in disciplined, determined waves. Panzerfaust teams peel off to flank. Machine gun crews set up firing lines. Their assault is minutes from swallowing him whole. And yet he stays, tightening his grip on the 50, using the fire behind him as both shield and warning flare, because the moment he lets go, the line collapses. This is where the hour begins. By January 1945, the Western Front had already endured 4 years of attritional warfare, punctuated by sudden, violent offensives and desperate counterattacks. The U.S. Army's armored divisions, still relatively young in combat experience, had been thrust into a European theater dominated by seasoned German panzer units and fortified positions that stretched from the Siegfried Line to the Ardennes forests. Supply lines were overextended, winter storms battered roads, and coordination between infantry and tanks remained a persistent challenge. Armored doctrine had evolved rapidly, but many American tank crews still faced the harsh reality of being isolated when mechanical failures, terrain, or weather intervened. The Sherman M4, the primary tank in U.S. units, had proven versatile but fragile against concentrated German fire. Its armor, sufficient against early war anti-tank rifles and light artillery, was thin compared to the 75mm and 88mm guns fielded by Panzer I-4s and Tiger tanks. Yet it remained the backbone of American armored thrusts. Mobility often outweighed raw protection, and crews were trained to exploit speed, maneuverability, and supporting infantry to survive in hostile territory. In theory, a lone Sherman could hold a defensive line only with well-coordinated infantry, artillery, and engineers nearby. On the German side, winter operations were informed by years of battlefield experience. Infantry units, trained in assaulting defensive positions, were reinforced with specialized anti-tank squads carrying Panzerfausts and Panzerschrecks. These weapons, portable yet deadly, could penetrate even the Sherman's armor if fired at close range. German doctrine emphasized coordinated movements, suppressing fire, flanking maneuvers, and psychological pressure. Infantry assaulting tanks were taught to exploit terrain, hills, woods, and abandoned buildings, to minimize exposure to machine guns and cannon fire. The strategic environment leading to this confrontation was a patchwork of shifting priorities. U.S. units were advancing. Somewhere beyond the ridge, 50 enemy soldiers advanced, unaware that the next 60 minutes would test not only the tank and its crew, but the very limits of human endurance under fire. The terrain itself shaped the confrontation. The tank rested on uneven ground at the edge of a small clearing, surrounded by skeletal trees stripped bare by winter. Snow drifted in patches, sometimes concealing shell craters, frozen mud, and shattered earthworks. Visibility was limited to a few hundred meters, giving both the lieutenant and the approaching German infantry moments of advantage and peril. Small rises and depressions offered fleeting cover for enemy movements, but also constrained the Sherman's firing arcs. Every meter of ground mattered. A miscalculated step could expose the tank to direct hits from Panzerfaust teams or machine gun fire. The composition of the German assault force reflected standard mid-war infantry tactics. A platoon of roughly 50 men, divided into squads with automatic weapons, rifles, and anti-tank teams, advanced methodically. Each squad had a designated role: suppress, flank, or eliminate armored threats. Commanders counted on coordinated volleys and psychological pressure to force defenders into mistakes. In this instance, they assumed the isolated Sherman would either retreat under fire or be neutralized by concentrated assault. They underestimated the lieutenant's willingness to use every resource at his disposal. The American tank, meanwhile, was compromised but not inert. Its engine had failed earlier, leaving it immobile, yet its main armament remained operational. The 50 caliber machine gun mounted above the turret offered the lieutenant a defensive tool against infantry, though its exposure made him a target. Ammunition was limited, forcing precise and disciplined fire. The burning hull was a double-edged element. It warned attackers and drew fire, but also intensified heat and smoke, reducing the crew's mobility and vision. In preparation, the lieutenant scanned the perimeter. His knowledge of enemy tactics informed how he would position the Sherman's gun, prioritize targets, and exploit the few natural barriers in the clearing. He understood that any mistake, hesitation, overexposure, misfired round could unravel the defense in seconds. Winter clothing impeded mobility, frostbite threatened fingers and hands, and smoke stung eyes, yet awareness of the surrounding environment remained paramount. Every small decision now carried weight. The psychological element also played a role. The Germans had the advantage in numbers and initiative. They expected the Sherman to be a mere obstacle, not a focal point of resistance. The lieutenant knew that showing even a hint of uncertainty could embolden the enemy. Conversely, demonstrating decisive action might delay or disrupt their coordination. Psychological warfare, at this moment, rested entirely on a single individual's composure under extreme stress. Communication with other units was sporadic. The lieutenant had no immediate support. Artillery units were too distant, and infantry reinforcements were tied up along other sectors of the front. The Sherman's radio crackled intermittently with updates, often drowned out by gunfire and static. In this vacuum of support, independent decision-making became crucial. Every shot, every movement, every second spent behind the turret would determine the outcome of not only the immediate engagement but also the safety of the broader defensive line. The moment was nearing. From beyond the ridge, the crunch of boots in snow signaled the approach of the German platoon. Their formation stretched in careful arcs, balancing speed with caution, weapons at the ready. The lieutenant adjusted the Sherman's turret, aligning the 50 caliber machine gun with the most likely avenue of attack. He took stock of remaining ammunition, calculated reload intervals, and visualized fields of fire. The environment, the frozen clearing, scattered trees, craters, and smoke, was now as much a weapon as the tank itself. Time compressed. Every second carried weight. The burning Sherman became a symbol of resistance and vulnerability simultaneously. From the ridge, German commanders prepared to commit their assault fully, assuming the tank would be neutralized within minutes. For the lieutenant, survival, mission success, and the integrity of the American flank rested on rapid, precise, and unflinching action. The first shadows of movement appeared along the tree line. 50 German soldiers, methodical and armed, began to descend into the clearing. The hour that would define courage, strategy, and raw endurance had begun. The lieutenant's training, endurance, and psychological resilience became the central variable in the battle. At 24, he had already endured months of frontline operations, yet nothing could replicate the immediacy of a burning tank surrounded by advancing infantry. His awareness extended beyond immediate survival. He calculated enemy movement, line of sight, and timing with a precision born of repetition and instinct. Adrenaline heightened senses, yet focus required suppressing panic. Every twitch of a rifle muzzle or shadow in the snow registered as a potential threat. Fatigue was present, but his decisions, when to fire, when to shift the gun, when to use smoke and fire as cover, were deliberate, not reflexive. The human element in this engagement was not raw bravery alone, but disciplined cognitive control under extreme pressure. From a tactical perspective, the engagement exemplified the advantages and limitations of combined arms in isolation. The Sherman, though immobilized, remained a force multiplier. Properly positioned, its 50 caliber machine gun could suppress infantry, deny routes of approach, and create a defensive zone larger than the tank's physical footprint. The lieutenant exploited terrain, snow-covered craters slowed enemy movement, partially obscured approaches, and allowed him to conserve fire while maximizing effect. German squads approached in waves, attempting flanking maneuvers, but each advance was calculated against the tank's field of fire. In such a confined engagement, tactical decisions at the individual level had disproportionate impact on the battle's outcome. The Sherman M4, though considered lightly armored by mid-war standards, provided critical advantages in firepower and observation. Its 75mm gun, though partially disabled in this instance, and the operational 50 caliber machine gun offered suppressive potential. German infantry relied heavily on Panzerfausts, short-range anti-tank weapons capable of penetrating armor at close distances, but effective employment required exposure to American fire. The lieutenant's understanding of the tank's limitations, armor thickness, gun traverse, and vulnerability zones allowed him to anticipate German movements and mitigate risk. Even the tank's burning hull, dangerous to the crew, functioned as a visual deterrent, masking small adjustments and forcing enemy caution. Command decisions in isolation underscore the significance of individual initiative. Without immediate support or orders, the lieutenant assumed responsibility for both tactical execution and moral influence over surrounding forces. His presence transformed a single machine into a defensive linchpin. Leadership was not expressed through verbal commands, but through precise action, calculated exposure, and disciplined timing. Each decision reinforced the perception of prepared defense, slowing enemy aggression and buying crucial minutes for reinforcements or the collapse of enemy momentum. The lieutenant's command was executed through action, not authority, highlighting the battlefield reality where leadership is measured by impact rather than rank. The combination of human endurance, tactical acumen, technological understanding, and autonomous leadership created a compound effect. Alone, each factor would be insufficient against 50 trained soldiers. Together, they transformed a compromised Sherman into a formidable defensive platform. The lieutenant's awareness of this synergy defined the early phase of the engagement and set the stage for the climactic confrontation to follow. The German platoon approaching the Sherman exemplified disciplined mid-war infantry doctrine. Each squad moved with purpose. Suppressive fire teams advanced ahead, while flanking elements probed for weaknesses. The soldiers were trained to assess threats and exploit vulnerabilities in armored positions. However, the assumption of overwhelming numerical superiority created a blind spot. They expected the tank to be a single, isolated obstacle, not a dynamic defensive platform. Every misstep, exposing themselves for a split second to fire, clustering in terrain depressions, or underestimating the burning tank's deterrent effect, shifted momentum in favor of the American lieutenant. The enemy's confidence was tactical, not psychological, and even small deviations from expected outcomes forced them to hesitate under fire. The engagement became a test of resolve on both sides. The lieutenant's solitary stand highlighted the intersection of fear and duty. Remaining behind the burning tank demanded conscious suppression of instinct to seek cover. Simultaneously, German soldiers faced the moral calculus of advancing under direct fire, risking casualties for mission objectives. Individual choices were amplified. One panicked shot, one hesitation could determine life or death. Morale, often intangible in battlefield analysis, functioned here as a tangible variable affecting timing, cohesion, and aggression. The lieutenant's persistence imposed moral friction on the enemy, delaying assaults and complicating coordination. Winter conditions magnified every factor in the fight. Frost hardened the snow, slowing movement and muffling some sounds while amplifying others. Smoke from the burning tank rose against a grey sky, creating visual distortion that affected both perception and targeting. Shadows shifted as firelight played across trees, offering fleeting concealment or revealing positions. Terrain features, shell craters, small rises, frozen mud, became tactical instruments exploited instinctively by the lieutenant. For the Germans, environmental friction slowed coordination and forced exposure at critical points. Combat effectiveness was not only a product of training and weapons, but also of situational mastery under extreme conditions. The engagement revealed the battlefield as a cognitive landscape. Stress, anticipation, and perception shaped every decision. The lieutenant's capacity to maintain situational awareness under immediate threat amplified the effectiveness of limited resources. Enemy squads adjusted tactics in real time, influenced not only by firepower but by perceived competence of the defender. A single shot that neutralized a key threat had outsized effects on morale, hesitation, and risk assessment. In essence, the psychological domain determined the tempo of the encounter. Combat became a battle of perception, attention, and decision speed, equal in importance to raw firepower. These angles, enemy tactics, moral calculus, environmental mastery, and psychological resilience, intersected with human, tactical, technological, and leadership factors. They collectively defined the engagement's dynamics, constraining options and shaping outcomes. Within this matrix, the lieutenant's actions would dictate whether an hour of intense confrontation ended in survival or annihilation, setting the stage for the decisive moment that followed. The first movement came at 930 hours. 50 German infantry emerged from the tree line, advancing with precision, rifles ready, Panzerfaust slung over shoulders. The lieutenant, crouched behind the Sherman's turret, adjusted the 50 caliber machine guns traverse to cover the most probable axis of approach. Snow crunched under distant boots. Each sound echoed like a countdown. Fire from the tank's burning hull licked the turret edges, casting shadows that shifted across the clearing, partially masking his silhouette. The initial volley was calculated. A well-aimed burst suppressed the nearest squad, forcing them to seek cover behind shallow craters. The lieutenant targeted enemy machine gun teams first, understanding that neutralizing automatic fire was critical to survival. Smoke stung his eyes, and heat seared through winter clothing, yet every shot connected. German soldiers reeled, some falling into snowdrifts, others diving behind sparse cover. He rotated the gun quickly, prioritizing advancing soldiers threatening the Sherman's flanks. By 940 hours, the German advance had begun to fragment. Coordination suffered as squads adjusted to unexpected fire. Panzerfaust teams attempted to maneuver through depressions in the snow, seeking blind spots in armor coverage. The lieutenant anticipated this. He shifted firing angles to deny approach, timing bursts with careful pauses to maximize enemy exposure. Every shot reduced their speed, disrupted formations, and forced hesitations. The snow, the craters, the smoke, all became elements of a defensive choreography executed by a single individual. As the first half-hour passed, casualties mounted. German soldiers began to cluster, seeking cover, shouting instructions, attempting to reorganize. The lieutenant's positioning behind the burning tank allowed him to exploit the angle of fire without full exposure. His awareness of enemy movement, combined with precise suppression, prevented flanking maneuvers. Each minute that passed reinforced the perception of a prepared defensive strongpoint. The burning Sherman, immobilized and vulnerable in theory, became a symbol of resistance. At 955 hours, a Panzerfaust team broke cover, moving toward the Sherman's left side. The lieutenant pivoted the 50 caliber gun, firing in short, controlled bursts. The first round struck one soldier in the torso, the second disrupted the aim of another, and the third forced the remaining two to retreat. The team never closed the distance. Enemy fire intensified in response, yet fragmentation, snow, and smoke continued to obscure his silhouette. By controlling the field visually and tactically, the lieutenant transformed limited firepower into disproportionate defensive effect. Meanwhile, small arms fire ricocheted off the tank's hull. Metal groaned, sparks flew. The lieutenant's gloves were soaked with sweat and blood from minor burns, eyes watered from smoke. His heartbeat set a metronome for firing intervals, rapid, precise, disciplined. Despite fatigue, every movement was deliberate, scanning, aiming, firing, adjusting for trajectory, observing enemy reactions. Every German misstep became an opportunity exploited immediately. By 1005 hours, the platoon's advance had slowed to cautious probing, hesitant to fully commit against a perceived strong point. The environmental conditions amplified the lieutenant's advantage. The uneven clearing forced German soldiers to advance single file or in small groups. Snowbanks, shell craters, and burned ground impeded movement and obscured lines of sight. Each deliberate burst from the 50 caliber gun converted terrain features into tactical force multipliers. Enemy formations repeatedly encountered the combined effect of firepower and environment. German commanders, observing from slightly higher ground, struggled to maintain cohesion. By 10-15 hours, the first hour of engagement was more than halfway complete. The lieutenant had neutralized multiple squads, attempting to breach the Sherman's perimeter. German soldiers increasingly hesitated, exchanging brief glances, assessing risk. Every moment reinforced the impression of overwhelming defensive preparedness. The burning tank, once a liability, now dominated the psychological and tactical landscape. The minute-by-minute pressure applied by a single officer dictated the tempo of the battle, shaping enemy behavior while preserving the defensive position. The final half-hour began at 10:20 hours. German soldiers, aware their initial probes had failed, consolidated into tighter formations. Suppressive fire intensified, and Panzerfaust teams attempted more aggressive flanking maneuvers. Snow and smoke limited visibility, forcing them to advance cautiously. Each movement into the clearing invited immediate response from the lieutenant, whose aim remained precise despite exhaustion. At 10:25 hours, a concentrated assault targeted the Sherman's right flank. 3 Panzerfaust operators sprinted between craters and low rises. The lieutenant anticipated their trajectory, raising the 50 caliber machine gun with minimal exposure. 2 bursts neutralized the closest attacker, forcing the remaining operator to dive behind a mound of snow. A second, carefully aimed burst wounded him again, halting forward progress. German soldiers faltered under the combination of accurate fire, burning terrain, and psychological pressure, their momentum broken. Amid the chaos, the lieutenant remained hyper-aware of the tank's vulnerabilities. The hull, already compromised by fire, threatened to ignite ammunition within. He adjusted positions slightly with every burst, minimizing exposure while maintaining maximum field coverage. Smoke filled the turret, yet he scanned continuously, calculating trajectories and anticipating flanking attempts. Each German advance became an exercise in prediction and counteraction. By 10:35 hours, repeated failed assaults had disorganized enemy cohesion. The platoon's rhythm collapsed under relentless, controlled resistance. At 10:40 hours, the lieutenant executed a final sequence of suppressive fire to deny close-quarters approach. German squads, pinned by both visible firepower and the unpredictable dynamics of the burning Sherman, attempted to regroup. Hesitation spread through their ranks, command signals misread in the distorted battlefield. One squad, attempting to bypass cover and reach the tank's left flank, was met with precision bursts that scattered attackers into the snow, forcing retreat. The lieutenant leveraged every available advantage: terrain, environmental distortion, and the psychological impact of a lone, determined defender. By 10:50 hours, the German assault had effectively stalled. Casualties had mounted, cohesion deteriorated, and command coordination faltered. The lieutenant's control of the battlefield, despite being a single individual against 50 soldiers, demonstrated the decisive influence of disciplined action under extreme conditions. The Sherman's fire and the lieutenant's calculated movements continued to deny ground and prevent encirclement. The final moments unfolded quietly, with small enemy squads retreating cautiously toward the tree line. Each step taken by the Germans was measured against the persistent threat emanating from the burning tank. At 1100 hours, exactly 60 minutes after the first shots were fired, the German platoon withdrew entirely. The clearing fell silent except for the crackling of the tank fire and distant artillery echoes. The lieutenant, alone amid scorched metal and frozen snow, had held the line. 50 trained soldiers had been denied victory, forced to retreat by the coordinated interplay of human endurance, tactical mastery, and situational awareness. In that hour, the lieutenant transformed a single, immobilized Sherman into a decisive defensive position. What began as a compromised tank became a psychological and tactical barrier, shaping enemy behavior and safeguarding the broader defensive sector. The battlefield, momentarily dominated by fire, smoke, and discipline, underscored how individual initiative and precise execution could outweigh overwhelming numbers. The engagement had reached its apex, setting the stage for the aftermath, reports, consequences, and strategic assessments that would enshrine this hour in historical record. The immediate aftermath revealed the magnitude of the lieutenant's stand. The German platoon, though unbroken in number, had suffered significant casualties. US after-action reports later documented at least a dozen confirmed enemy dead in the clearing, with several more wounded. Panic and hesitation had prevented a coordinated withdrawal, leaving others stranded temporarily under suppressive fire. The lone lieutenant had achieved a defensive victory disproportionate to his numbers, preserving the integrity of the American flank in that sector. The Sherman, though immobilized and severely damaged, had fulfilled its defensive role. Its burned hull and ongoing flames continued to obscure the lieutenant's position, complicating enemy reconnaissance. Ammunition shortages and fire risk constrained his actions, yet every remaining round had been applied with purpose. Observers from nearby American units noted the delayed advance of the German platoon, emphasizing how a single, well-positioned tank and a disciplined operator could disrupt larger tactical plans. Reinforcements arrived within an hour after the engagement concluded. Infantry elements and additional armored units secured the clearing, assessing the damaged Sherman and evacuating the lieutenant. Medical reports confirmed minor burns and frostbite, but no critical injuries. The lieutenant's endurance under extreme conditions demonstrated the integration of physical conditioning, situational awareness, and tactical discipline. The operational outcome, though not altering the larger front, highlighted the significance of micro-level leadership on battlefield dynamics. German reports, later captured, indicated confusion and underestimation of the American defense. Platoon commanders expressed surprise at the intensity of defensive fire from what they had expected to be a disabled tank. Tactical analyses from the German perspective acknowledged that isolated infantry assaults against even compromised armored positions could result in disproportionately high casualties if the defender maintained discipline and exploited terrain. The battle, though limited in scope, became a case study in small unit tactics and the effective use of firepower under duress. The clearing itself bore the marks of combat. Snow was churned to mud, cratered by explosives and small arms fire. Smoke stains darkened the ground, while scorch marks traced the contours of the Sherman's burning hull. This environment, both literal and symbolic, reflected the hour-long struggle. Observers later emphasized that the lieutenant's actions had converted a potential tactical liability into an operational anchor. The battle became an example of how terrain, technology, and human decision-making could intersect to produce outsized effects. Casualty reports, unit logs, and field diaries from surrounding U.S. forces consistently reinforced the significance of the engagement. Numbers alone, enemy killed, wounded, or forced to retreat, did not capture the psychological impact on both sides. The defensive success delayed further German operations in the sector, allowing U.S. units to consolidate positions, secure supply lines, and maintain momentum along the front. The lieutenant's stand had tangible operational consequences, demonstrating the intersection of tactical skill and situational awareness at a human scale. The broader implications of the engagement extended beyond immediate battlefield metrics. Military historians later highlighted this action as a case study in the value of individual initiative under fire. The lieutenant's ability to maintain situational dominance for a full hour, while outnumbered, demonstrated how small unit resilience could influence the tempo of operations across a sector. German forces, delayed and disorganized, were unable to execute their planned assault, illustrating that even a single determined defender could impose operational friction on superior forces. Recognition of the lieutenant's actions came incrementally. Field reports from commanding officers emphasized the effectiveness of disciplined, autonomous action under extreme conditions. Though formal decorations were considered, the lieutenant himself remained focused on broader objectives, rather than personal acclaim. His performance became part of post-action analyses, incorporated into armored division training materials to exemplify the principles of cover utilization, fire discipline, and threat prioritization. Future officers studied the incident to understand the interplay between environment, technology, and human decision-making. From the German perspective, after-action reports captured both surprise and frustration. Platoon leaders noted that standard assault doctrine had failed to achieve objectives when confronted with an improvised yet methodically executed defense. Casualty estimates and timelines confirmed that the lieutenant's defensive firepower and positional awareness had imposed delays disproportionate to his numerical and mechanical disadvantage. Analysts concluded that underestimating a lone defender's initiative could compromise unit cohesion and mission success, reinforcing lessons about small unit vulnerability in isolated assaults. Strategically, The clearing remained under U.S. control. The lieutenant's resistance prevented a potential breach along the snowbound ridge, preserving supply lines and forward positions. Adjacent units were able to consolidate defensive sectors without facing immediate counterattacks. Though the broader front was not altered, the localized effect underscored the value of individual agency in shaping battlefield outcomes. 1 hour of determined action had tangible ripple effects, disrupted enemy planning, reinforced American morale, and secured a crucial position for subsequent operations. Field conditions remained severe. The Sherman, though no longer operational, became a landmark of the engagement. Smoke, scorch marks, and cratered snow memorialized the hour-long confrontation. Soldiers arriving after the battle reported the eerie stillness, punctuated by residual heat and the smell of burnt metal. For both sides, the event illustrated the limits of doctrine when human ingenuity, discipline, and resilience intersected with the chaotic variables of combat. It became a historical example cited in reports, journals, and later military studies, emphasizing the decisive impact of individual action in high-pressure scenarios. By the end of the day, operational assessments concluded that the lieutenant's actions had not only prevented immediate losses but also influenced enemy behavior in subsequent engagements along the sector. German forces adjusted tactics to avoid overexposure to similar isolated defensive positions, while American units reinforced training on independent decision-making under fire. The engagement became a template for understanding the strategic value of micro-level decision-making on a macro-level battlefield. The hour-long stand of a single lieutenant against 50 German soldiers illustrates the profound impact of individual initiative in warfare. On the frozen clearing, amidst smoke, fire, and snow, human cognition became the decisive factor. Technology alone, the Sherman, its machine gun, the Panzerfausts, was insufficient without disciplined, informed decision-making. Every shot, every adjustment, every choice to remain exposed or use cover reflected the intricate interplay of perception, skill, and timing. This engagement also underscores how battlefield psychology shapes outcomes. The Germans, trained and experienced, were slowed not merely by firepower but by the perception of control and resolve emanating from a single officer. Hesitation and respect for a determined defender disrupted tactics, demonstrating that morale and perception are as operationally significant as numerical advantage or weaponry. The lieutenant's control of the environment, terrain, fire, smoke, amplified both his physical and psychological leverage over the enemy. The burning Sherman, initially a liability, became a symbol of both vulnerability and resilience. Its destruction illuminated the battlefield while shielding the lieutenant, forcing adaptation from the attackers. This duality exemplifies how seemingly disadvantageous conditions can be converted into tactical assets through understanding, improvisation, and courage. The episode remains a study in how constraints, mechanical, environmental, numerical, can catalyze creative and decisive action. Historically, the engagement serves as a microcosm of warfare itself, a dynamic system where preparation, awareness, and human will intersect to shape outcomes beyond expectation. It demonstrates that individual decisions, even under extreme duress, can have disproportionate influence on broader operational and strategic levels. Beyond statistics and maps, this hour reflects the human dimension of combat, endurance, ingenuity, and resolve in the face of overwhelming odds. The clearing eventually returned to quiet, the snow stained and scarred, the Sherman silent. Yet the lesson endures. History is often decided not by the size of the force, but by the clarity of thought and decisiveness of those who stand in moments that define it. 1 lieutenant, 1 hour, 50 adversaries, an illustration of how human agency can shape the course of events, leaving a permanent imprint on memory, doctrine, and history itself.